Hi, and welcome again to Off the Page. I'm Leslie Choice. My guest today is Elizabeth May. She's Executive Director of the Sierra Club of Canada. She's also co-author with Maude Barlow of a new book called Frederick Street. Welcome. Good to have you on the show.
Great to be here, Leslie.
I know you as a tireless activist going back to the 1970s, early 1980s in Cape Breton up to today when you're involved in so many things. What really got you going?
That's a very hard question because I've been involved in the environmental movement for as long as I can remember. At least consciously, I know I was involved from the point that I was in 10th grade in 1970 and started organizing for the first Earth Day. So something about it is like a calling or a mission. I mean, I don't want to sound sort of, you know, like I think I'm Joan of Arc or something. I don't hear voices, but I've always known that this is what I'm supposed to do. And and believe me, there's always a new disaster that says, I've got to go do this now, and I'm already doing all these other things, but I've still got to do the things that outrage me so much that I have to be committed to doing something to make a change.
And there's no end to it, obviously. I mean, you don't sort of leave one battle behind and move on to the next because battles aren't ever 100% won.
Well, that's right. In the environmental movement, particularly in the movement for wilderness preservation, one of my friends once said, well, you know, every victory is temporary and every defeat is permanent. Well, that can be very discouraging. But overall, we generally celebrate our victories for about 10 or 15 minutes, say, great, thank goodness. And then there's something immediate. And it's just incredible how relentless the onslaught is, but the planet is being relentlessly assaulted. So, of course, the job seems unending.
And you're one of the great defenders, one of my heroes. Your latest book, Frederick Street, and in the subtitle is an equivalent of Canada's Love Canal. We're talking about Sydney, the Sydney tar ponds. Could you give us just sort of the general kind of background, the picture of what's going on there and how bad it is?
Yeah, it's phenomenally bad. And I've been working on the issue as an activist, well, actually going back a decade or so. And what's been so frustrating is that something that is as outrageous as this can continue to go on in a wealthy country. I mean, this is a scale of industrial devastation that wouldn't surprise you if you heard about it in the former Soviet Union or in the Third World. But to think that in Canada, we allowed a steel plant and coking ovens to operate with no pollution controls ever. And what was a revelation for me in working with Maude and doing this book was the extent of the abuse of the workers. I mean, I realized when working on the book that if human life counted for nothing in this mill, it's no wonder that the streams and the ocean and everything around it also counted for nothing. So what we really have here is the equivalent of 35 times as much toxic pollution as was in Love Canal. And although they're called ponds, it's actually an estuary that continues to be open to the sea, so the daily tidal actions carry carcinogenic pollution further out to sea. And it's smack dab in the middle of the most heavily populated part of Cape Breton Island in Sydney.
Sydney, Whitney Pier community in Cape Breton.
And Ashby, and the whole, they gave the steel mill at the turn of the last century, 1900, they gave the steel mill 500 acres in the middle of the community. It's astonishing, that decision. And then all of the people who came to work in the mill settled in an area called Whitney Pier, downwind from the most extraordinary, unbelievable, unbearable pollution. And now that a lot of that airborne pollution is wound down, we're left with about, well, to give the viewers an idea, about 200 acres at least of intensely polluted, both estuary and soils polluted to depths of 80 feet. And all around it are homes and schools and shopping centers. I mean, one of the things we recount in the book is this summer that they were last summer building an extension to the local Sobeys store, the grocery, and contaminated ooze was coming up while the workers were putting in the foundation. They just kept building.
Not a great place for a lot of food.
No.
What kind of toxins are we talking about here?
Well, it's predominantly what's produced when you burn Cape Breton coal, bake it to make coke. So it's a huge volume of things called polyaromatic hydrocarbons and other aromatic hydrocarbons. So things like benzenes and naphthalene and benzopyrene, just a whole range of carcinogenic chemicals, tons of them.
So it gets absorbed by what's the soil of the marsh?
Yeah, it goes into the sludge. But
yeah.
Aromatic, as the term suggests, when the sun beats down on this stuff, it vaporizes.
Smell.
So you breathe it. I mean, you smell it. Now that I know, it's interesting working with people on Frederick Street, when the winds would come off one direction, they'd say, oh, that's the benzene. They said, no, that's naphthalene. They got to be able to figure out which was which. And then the other problem that is in the Sydney tar ponds is that other stuff got dumped there too. So there's about 500,000, there's 700,000 tons altogether of contaminated sludge, of which 50,000 tons is PCB contaminated sludge, which was dumped from transformers that were used both at the steel mills and at the rail yard next door.
If you already had all the other garbage and the deadly stuff there, you might as well dump some more into it. What's the difference?
That's right. I mean, at the point that you stop calling a place Mugga Creek and start calling it the tar pond, and it's a dead zone and nothing lives there and everybody knows it, I mean, why not keep dumping things?
So why would people continue to live there that close on Frederick Street?
Well, it's not, we called the book Frederick Street because we approached this through the life experience of people trying to get out, right? As they realized that their basement started filling up with yellowy goo and the health hazards they started associating with the pollution. But it's really it's larger community than that. Why do people still live there? Lack of choice. Sometimes people, for a long time, people didn't realize that it was making them sick. I've talked to people who thought that it was normal that you got up in the morning and had blinding headaches and nosebleeds and had to lie down with cold compresses. Didn't know this wasn't normal. And economics. A lot of the people, I remember talking to one of the women we quote in the book and said, you know, why don't you move now? She couldn't drink the water, it was foul, she was really worried about her health. She said, look, I own this house. I'm on a $300 a month pension. I leave here, I'm a bag lady. Don't have a lot of options. I need to, you know. So it's a combination also, I think there's very key equity issues here. This community is contaminated because they're poor, because they're politically forgotten and don't have clout. And it's also the only community of any particular proportion of people of color. So you've got a lot of basically environmental racism issues on top of all the, the discrimination that pollution brings with it.
Now, the government has tried in some kind of attempts over the years to fix this problem, to deal with this problem. Haven't I heard about gizmos to burn the stuff up, to pour in concrete or other things? It seemed like there's been various proposals. Why has there been this string of failures?
I know, it's incredible. In addition to all the pollution dumped in the tar ponds, we've seen hundreds of millions of dollars at this point disappearing there. $55 million was wasted on an incinerator system that was never appropriate anyway and then didn't work. One of the Environment Canada officials said, Murphy this isn't just Murphy's Law at work, Murphy made a career out of this. Yeah. The bungling, the mistakes, there's never any accountability. No one ever says, well, we better sue the company that brought in this engineering plan that doesn't work. And there's never been a commitment from government to move people away. And that's one of the real calls from the book is human health is at risk here. We still have very high birth defect rates in this community.
And what about the cancer rates?
Cancer rates are through the roof, and so we're crying out, and the people in this community are crying out for restitution, for being given homes and having neighborhoods placed in areas that are healthy. But all the bungled cleanup attempts are now we're just moving in slow motion to what will we try next. And there is a commitment to cleanup, but there isn't yet a commitment to moving people away, and there is no date by which we will see a cleanup start. So it's been in slow motion.
What would be the price tag on something like this? $1 billion? It just sounds like one of those insurmountable things which scares government off further because they don't want to put up the bucks.
Well, that's it. And also you have to remember that the last polluter for the last 30 years of running the mill was the government. Mm-hmm. So they can't look to anyone else with deep pockets to bail them out who's liable. They're liable. Actually, when the government took over running the steel mill, pollution of all sorts went up, and there was no pollution control ever put in. So the government has reason to be worried. They know it'll have to be cleaned up, but every government would just as soon it was on someone else's watch.
But provincial and federal, or
both provincial and federal. And it is possible to clean up this kind of toxic mess. It's been cleaned up in other parts of the world. It isn't cheap. And in the meantime, you should move people away. And one of the things that's incredible about Canada, we think we're a really wonderful, environmentally appropriate country. We have absolutely no national program to clean up toxic waste sites. We don't even count them. We don't know where they are. So every toxic waste site and all the people who live near those sites are dealt with on a case-by-case, ad hoc basis. So some people in other parts of Canada have had toxic waste, and the decision's been made to compensate the people and move them away. But in Sydney, it's just, well, the governments keep trying to blame the cancer rates in Sydney on people's lifestyles. They're still eating too many salty foods, and they're drinking and smoking, and it's outrageous.
But the evidence is there; it's causing the cancer. Tell me about Debbie Ouellette.
She's one of the women on Frederick Street who first started organizing, started realizing that she thought for a while she had a migraine. See, that they brought backhoes on to the coke oven site right in front of Frederick Street beginning of spring of '98, and that's what triggered a new wave of health problems for residents there because it disturbed the site enough to stir up some of that pollution. And Debbie was one of the first ones to think, when she realized that her other best friends and neighbors on the street also had headaches, she began to think, okay, it's not just me. I don't just have, unbearable headaches all of a sudden. It's what they were doing on that site. Because after all, the guys who did the work were wearing white environmental hazard suits. They were wearing moon suits to work on a space stone's throw from her backyard. So she's one of the people who's just very diligent and dogged in pursuit of justice, and she has now moved out of Frederick Street. But,
good move.
But unfortunately, the only house the government they gave these people the worst, the most despicably cheap offer. They offered them the tax-assessed value of their homes. It's like $30,000 each. Even in Sydney, you can't find a house for that. So anyway, Debbie's family is now on the other side of the coke ovens, still within any zone that I would imagine should eventually be evacuated, but at least she's a little further away from the coke ovens.
So here's a problem from the 19th century, lasting a full 100 years through the 20th century and into the 21st century. Is there anything clear-cut, aside from moving people out of their home, that's actually being done to address this problem right now?
No. No, actually, $62 million was announced in June of '99, and none of it is for cleaning up the site, and none of it is for moving people away. Oh. $10 million of it, this is only could this, I mean, it's unbelievable, only around the tar ponds could you have this be described as an environmental cleanup. $10 million is going to build a really large sewage collector pipe to take the conventional municipal sewage and stop having it dumped in the toxic estuary, divert it, and dump it untreated in the harbor.
It's still raw waste going into the harbor, along with the other stuff, which just goes like having two different highways to get to the same location.
So we're going to collect all the municipal waste that's from non-toxic sources and dump it untreated in the harbor. That's a $10 million cleanup plan. We're putting more money, another $12 million, into health studies. But the health studies keep saying the same thing. People in this community are dying more than other people, even in adjacent communities in industrial Cape Breton, dying more than in New Waterford or Glace Bay.
Is part of this that old battleground, the wrong one, the misalignment that happens between jobs versus the environment?
Yeah, this is one of the cruelest cases you can imagine of job blackmail, where people literally workers knew they were trading their life away to be able to provide food for their family. What they didn't know was that the legacy of toxic waste would continue to kill their family members, their grandchildren. But there was a story we recount where women in the community went to the mill because they were just so sick of hanging out their wash on wash day and having it be completely black from the mill pollution. And the manager said, look, ladies, no smoke, no baloney. And that has been this trade-off of, you want jobs? You're going to sacrifice your health. You want jobs? Don't care about having a pristine environment. And it was such a monumental lie, particularly when you had something that was only supported by tax dollars. Nearly $3 billion to prop up a mill that couldn't make money. At the same time, pollution, occupational, just a disaster for people working in that site. So the larger lesson we hope people will draw from this book is never, ever, ever accept that kind of trade-off. There are the kinds of jobs a person wants and deserves are the kinds that don't require that you accept you're going to die before you collect your first pension check.
Absolutely. My guest today is Elizabeth May, and we're going to take a short break and be back right after this. My guest today is Elizabeth May. We've been talking about her book, Frederick Street. Elizabeth, who are your heroes? Oh,
boy. Well, Maud Barlow is one of my heroes, and she's my co-author.
Yeah, wonderful person.
And Vandana Shiva in India, and Farley Mowat's one of my heroes.
People who have...
People in the environmental movement, people who stand up for the right things. I've been lucky to become, admire people from afar, and then they become my friends. This is really nice. This is one of the nice things about the environmental movement.
There's a community of activists
Well, there's
out there.
no hierarchy, right? So if you're an activist, and you're eventually going to meet all the other people in the whole world who are doing the right thing. It's amazing.
Any personal sacrifices involved in being so outspoken, being an activist like yourself?
Oh, you could call them sacrifices. I mean, we've had hard times in terms of, well, particularly years ago, you mentioned all the fights in Cape Breton, and during the herbicide case in the early 80s, my family lost 80 acres of land to pay off a bill owed to Scott Paper.
These were herbicides being sprayed to kill off the hardwood trees?
Yes, this
so
was a combination known in the Vietnam War as Agent Orange.
Yeah.
And they wanted to spray 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T in combination on our island. And we were able to stop them in court, even though we lost the court case. By the time the judge ruled that these chemicals were safe and had never caused any problems, even in Vietnam, it was a remarkable decision. But they ruled against us for costs and damages, as had a previous ruling. So some of it, there's no question it's financially punishing, but it is richly, emotionally, and spiritually rewarding. And so I'll come out of the closet saying I'm a practicing Christian. So I do believe that you store up your treasure somewhere else than your RRSPs. So I don't really know that I regard that as a sacrifice. I do have a problem spending enough time with my daughter, who's now 8, but the environmental movement also being flexible, I've been able to bring her with me to places and travel together and spend time with her in different ways. And so I don't really think there's any sacrifices. It sometimes can be a bit scary financially.
Yeah. Now you admit you're a Christian.
Yeah.
What's the element of spirituality in this fight?
Well, I think it's fundamentally good versus evil. I mean, or more fundamentally, perhaps life versus money. I mean, if you're not going to put it in conventional religious terms, it's a contest between life and money is what's going on right now in the world. And so I personally draw a lot of strength from my faith and my church community, and, organized religion gives me a lot of strength because I'm able to worship and see people who represent a larger family that embraces me and helps me in my work. This is a helpful thing.
Do you get accused of being that radical, that fringe lunatic? I mean, you've got corporate people who don't like you all that much, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, that's true. I got accused of that a lot more when I was younger. Against all odds, I seem to have become more respectable. I don't think I've done anything that's more respectable than what I did when I was younger, but I'm now a faculty member at Dalhousie University.
That's right.
For
You
instance.
just received an honorary doctorate from Mount St. Vincent University.
Yes,
Congratulations.
Yes, it's very so. I mean, these honors bestowed on me, I just a bit surprised, but I'm very grateful, and I'm less accused of being an extremist. I mean, we still have, of course, the Terence Corcorans of the world, who are, abusive in their critique, and the Tom DeCinos and BCNI crowd, Business Council on National Issues, who think we're extremists. But generally, the public is, and increasingly even institutions, accept that there's a role for us, which makes me worry if I'm very effective if I get too respectable.
Well, yeah, you got to worry about that sometimes.
You do.
What about people out there that have become very comfortable? We all become very comfortable with handing over our responsibility on big issues to the experts, to government, sometimes to academics, sometimes to corporations. They're the people who should know. They have more information than we do, and we're told, well, you don't really understand these things. How do you feel about that kind of scenario?
That makes me really angry. We're fortunate to live in a democracy, and there should be never, ever, ever on public policy issues should we defer to experts, because there aren't any experts in public policy except citizens. I mean, scientists can tell you so much about, well, this is our area of uncertainty, this is what we understand. But beyond that, it's a question of, well, what level of risk are you willing to accept in society? So, for instance, expert dealing with toxic waste says, well, how much can you be exposed to before you die? I mean, there's a right and a wrong here, and I sometimes compare it to, well, if a big bully was beating up a smaller kid in the schoolyard, you don't stand back and say, wonder how many times that big kid can hit that small kid before that small kid suffers permanent damage. And these things aren't good for us, and we should be able to make choices to say we don't want to be contaminated with persistent organic pollutants. We don't want to know that the breast cancer rates keep rising. Children's brain cancer rates are rising very rapidly. Young men, testicular cancer. By living in a toxic soup, we are being poisoned, and we are losing our health and losing our lives. And if we're then told, well, you don't understand it because you're not an expert, it just is offensive, and it's wrong. As citizens, we should participate, and as intelligent people, we should read and understand and take on the challenges and not ever defer to an expert.
So Sydney tar ponds is kind of the flagship of the toxic waste problems across Canada, as well as other environmental disasters or crises that get ignored. Why is it that government fails federal, provincial, whatever? Why is it the government fails on these various issues? Are people simply not screaming loud enough?
Well,
not
that's a
informed
big part
enough?
of it. I mean, we need to move governments, and to do that, politicians need to feel that they are vulnerable to not getting reelected. That's what moves them. If it's not the large cash donations, which move you in a certain direction when you're a politician, the fact that you might lose your seat is where citizens have clout. And unfortunately, particularly recently, the federal government, Chrétien government, is the most awful government we've had on environmental issues, just appalling. And at the same time, provincial governments across the country have weakened environment's role and weakened the role of environment departments. So budgets have been slashed at least a third federally and in every province that you survey. So there's less concern for the environment, even though the public cares a lot. And I asked a friend who is within the Liberal Party, and they have pollsters that tell them things. They said, oh yeah, the public says that the environment is one of their top 4 concerns. I said, well then, why isn't the government doing something to address this legacy of toxic waste, to do something about climate change? And the answer was, well, environment scores 17th on the list of issues that will affect the way you vote. So we really have to.
Environmentalism isn't as sexy as it used to be. It used to be something that made people feel good and, you know, interesting and angry to be out there, you know, on the front lines of it. And it lost a little bit of that appeal somehow, I think.
Well, we went into a profound media chill, if you will, after Rio. We dropped right off the agenda after the Earth Summit in '92. And media is fickle about this stuff. I mean, they'll cover an issue up to a point, and then they say, well, didn't we just do that? And then when the public doesn't hear anything about environmental contamination, it's just as easy to assume, well, that big fuss we made in the late 80s must have resulted in changes. So it's easier to then forget about it. So a lot of the need to motivate the pressure on politicians is often generated by the news media, and the news media is increasingly paying more attention to frivolous celebrity problems. And I mean, it's a funny story actually, Earth Day morning this year, April 22nd, 2000, I was supposed to be getting interviewed by the national CBC News. They were going to come over with a TV crew.
Yes.
And I was listening to the morning radio, and the news was Elian Gonzalez has just been smuggled out of the house in Miami. I thought, okay, this is my line, because I think about my
Americans
line.
were obsessed with that news.
Yeah. So I thought, well, this is what I'll say. I'll say, when they come around, that if the environment got half as much coverage as Elian Gonzalez, then we'd see action. And around that time, the phone rang. They canceled the interview because the one reporter who was going to come talk to me had just been flown to Washington to be interviewed, to go cover Elian Gonzalez. So the media plays a big role in what people understand is happening to the planet.
Which is why we need folks like you out there keeping the information flowing. We're going to take another short break, and we'll be right back after this. You've been watching Off the Page, and my guest is Elizabeth May. Elizabeth, give me a utopian scenario. 10 years from now, Canada, what's the dreamscape of the improved country you would like to see?
Oh, that would be wonderful to think about. By every sector, if we put community needs first, what does the greatest good for the greatest number? In other words, if we shifted our focus as a society from what helps private wealth to what helps public good, we would have a very different kind of country, and we'd have a different kind of world. And 10 years from now, that's ambitious, but let's dream it anyway.
Maybe. Sounds like a good case scenario to me. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Leslie.
And thanks for watching Off the Page. I'll see you again next time.